Welcome to the special report with Areva Martin, where we tackle today's most pressing issues with deep insight and analysis. This is the show you turn to when you want your news unfiltered, where we give you the information and resources you need while separating fact from fiction. Coming up, we're discussing a new policy from the U.S. Department of Education that is sending shockwaves through college campuses across the nation. Universities have been given just 2 weeks to disseminate just 2 weeks to dismantle race-related student organizations or risk losing critical federal funding. Now, is this the end of safe spaces for students of color on colleges and university campuses around this country? And what does this mean for the future of diversity in higher education?
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
Today, we're tackling a decision that could change the face of higher education in America. A new directive from the Department of Education is forcing colleges and universities to eliminate all race-related campus organizations. This means Black student organizations, Latino and Latina student organizations. This could even mean the end of Black and Latino graduations. Wow. Groups that have long served as lifelines for students of color are now fretting and trying to determine what this directive means in terms of their organizations. This policy, as you can imagine, has sparked outrage, legal debates, and protests across the country. Today, we're speaking to people on the front lines of this fight, students, activists, and scholars, to unpack what this means for the future of race equity in America. To kick this conversation off, I am so happy to be joined by two law school students. Joining me this morning are Christina Oheming and Avery Sullivan. They are both law students at Columbia University's Law School in New York. Both of them are members of the Black Law Student Association, better known as BALSA. And full disclosure here, I have 3 Columbia Lions in my family. My husband is a graduate of the college, Columbia College. He got his undergraduate degree there. I have 2 daughters who also graduated from Columbia's Law School. Both of them also have attended Columbia's Graduate School of Business. My second daughter, Morgan, happens to still be on the campus as she is finishing her graduate master's program. And both Michael and Morgan, when they were at the law school, were involved in BALSA. I'm also a lawyer, as you all know. I attended that other law school down the road a little bit, and I was a leader. I was a representative of BALSA. I actually was in leadership with my Black Law Student Association when I was at Harvard Law School. So I know the importance, I know the role that these organizations like BALSA play on law school campuses, particularly predominantly white campuses like Harvard, like Columbia, where students of color already face a great deal of isolation. My daughter, Michael, when there, did a very, very popular TED Talk on being a law student at a predominantly white law school and some of the discrimination and racial harassment that she faced from other students and some staff even at Columbia Law School. So I've got a lot of personal insights into what happens on these campuses and with these organizations. So thank you so much, Christina and Avery, for joining me for this conversation. Thank you for being representatives of BALSA, for doing the work that you do on that campus. So I want to start with you, Avery. I know you are the social consciousness chair for BALSA. Tell me your reaction when you first learned about this Department of Education policy that gave colleges, universities, K through 12 schools around the nation 2 weeks to dismantle programs essentially like BALSA.
Yeah, I think that, we've been, especially as social consciousness chair, we're actively always responding to political changes and movements that affect our community. And I think this was particularly shocking, not because of the fact that we weren't prepared for this new administration to be hostile towards anyone that doesn't look like them, but more so just the speed at which it was happening, and truly the lack of response that we've been able to have from our own university and others to really provide a path forward. I think that we as students continually during our tenure, we started last spring, like we have had to shoulder the burden a lot to meet that gap of where students aren't feeling met. And I think this is just another example of how do we continue to do that when we might not even exist in a few weeks.
So, Christina, have you all meaning the BALSA organization, received any directives, any communications, anything from the law school telling you how they are interpreting this directive and how they're going to respond to it?
Well, so far we haven't received any, affirmative answers about what they plan to do, especially with this 2-week deadline, rapidly approaching. But affinity leaders such as myself and at other clubs on campus are really trying to put pressure on the administration to give us an answer one way or the other. As we've seen at other schools within the university system, they have started taking down their diversity, equity, and inclusion pages. So far at the law school, last I checked, those websites are still up, but we just want to know where the school stands in the midst of all this turbulence.
So I remember last year, I actually was the speaker, one of the speakers at the Black graduation that was hosted by BALSA. It wasn't on the campus, it was at an offsite location, but I remember the tense relationships between students and faculty at Columbia last year. Right as the Gaza protests were happening, some of the actions the university took in terms of calling the police on students, forced removal of students from the campuses, the shuttering of the entire main graduation. So Michael and Morgan, although they had a law school graduation, they weren't able to participate in the all-campus graduation because they canceled it out of fear and concerns. They said that there could be protests and maybe violence on the main yard. So Columbia is dealing with that history, the history of the protests, how they dealt with the protests. How much do you think that history is impacting how the university is responding, or in this case, I'll say not responding promptly to this education directive or the Department of Education directive?
I think, there's a sense that there's kind of a spotlight on Columbia University right now, especially with the events of last spring. I think that when it comes to some of these, really controversial moves by the federal administration, people are looking to see, okay, what are Columbia students going to do about it? And I think even a recent journal article that was talking about this new policy from the Trump administration had a photo of Columbia University's campus in the background, which just goes to show you that people have their eyes on Columbia. And I think that's something that the students are aware of and that the administration is aware of as well.
And Avery, a lot of people don't know what BALSA and other affinity groups like BALSA do on these campuses and why they are so important. Just speak, from your own personal experience, what does BALSA mean to you, and the prospect of it going away? What would it mean for future Black law students?
Absolutely. I think that it is the bridge that we talk about when we're letting in students of color into these very predominantly white institutions and spaces they weren't allowed into. These affinity groups are essential to understanding how to navigate that space, how to navigate your own identity in this world that hasn't really been made for you. I know for myself personally, I wouldn't have the professional opportunities I have, and likely not even my job as it stands, without the resources from BALSA of interview workshops, resume workshops, putting me in the right places to be able to allow me to seek those opportunities in big law firms and beyond. And I know that it really devastates us thinking about how many students would no longer have access to that if we weren't able to exist. And I think another thing that people don't realize is that while affinity groups may have certain identities that they focus and try to meet everyone with, it's really a collaborative experience. Like, we often combine with organizations like LOSA, which is the Latinx student organization, or we put out, joint statements and events with the PULSA, which is the Asian Pacific Islanders organization. And I think that people don't realize how much effort actually goes into making sure students of color feel welcome here and able to navigate their space both socially and professionally and academically as well.
And Christine, I think there's some I don't think I know, a lot of disinformation on the internet about these affinity groups. And a lot of what we're hearing from the Trump administration is that these are DEI groups, organizations that discriminate against white and Asian students. I know from my time as a BALSA leader, as an elected person, working on the BALSA board, that BALSA was always open to anyone. Yes, it focused on the needs of Black law students, but you could be white, you could be Asian, you could be any color, and have any race, and be allowed to join, to participate. Is that still the case today? Is BALSA a group that's open to any law student on that campus?
Absolutely. BALSA has always and will continue to be a space that, while we center celebrating Black lawyers and Black professionals, we are open to the Columbia community at large. And as Avery mentioned, we have a long history of collaborating with other affinity orgs and non-affinity orgs within the law school space. I think what BALSA is really here to do is just show the wider law school community what it means to be Black in the legal profession. I think Avery touched on a lot of amazing points. And another thing I want to add is just situating BALSA as a historical organization. I mean, this is an organization that was founded in the 1960s, very responsive to the civil rights movement. And BALSAs here in New York and across the country have been responsive to larger political movements. At Columbia, our BALSA pushed our school to divest from apartheid South Africa. So we also need to consider that context as well. And that's a history that we always share with the student body. I mean, to even operate as an organization on Columbia's campus, we are required to have our events be open to the student body, and we have abided by that policy.
So, Avery, when you hear members of the Trump administration talk about discrimination against white students on campuses, particularly a campus like Columbia, where the predominant, population, particularly in the law school, are going to be white students, what goes through your mind when you hear that, this notion that somehow white students are being disadvantaged by affinity groups or by scholarships that are targeting students of color, or, by any efforts to address the systemic racism and the decades of, inequities that have existed in higher education, particularly in the legal profession?
Yeah, I think that it fundamentally misunderstands the purpose of affinity groups and the way that they are tied to our history and to our future. I think that recognizing that these identities need extra help in navigating the world that we've set up, I think that it makes perfect sense that we would need to create a community where everyone feels welcome and able to take the opportunities that weren't previously given to them. And I think that it also doesn't recognize the value that those students of color are able to then bring to these spaces and to enrich them. I think that to position it as though it's a zero-sum game where either students of color succeed or white students succeed, I think doesn't understand how much our world is changing and how we're able to develop together. The reason that we're even breaking barriers the way that we are, and we're seeing students of color in places we've never seen them before, is because we've established these systems of affinity groups. I mean, to quote Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you don't just throw out your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're no longer getting wet. We set up these systems with this in mind so that we can all succeed together. It's not a zero-sum game.
Christina, have you seen the white law students on Columbia's campus, stand up, speak up, voice any solidarity around pushing back and resisting the Trump administration's efforts to, dismantle affinity groups or dismantle DEI efforts on campuses like Columbia?
I think individually and both organizationally, a lot of students on campus have been pretty proactive about discussing what this recent Trump administration is really aiming to do. I would say personally, I have interacted with a lot of my white classmates who have expressed, just outrage, shock, and confusion, a lot of things that their minority classmates are experiencing. But they've also been trying to translate that into their own form of activism and standing up and saying, this is wrong.
So we have, we've seen some college professors speak up and say that the way they interpret the college admissions decision by the Supreme Court is very narrow, and that they do not believe that there's a legal basis for this attack on all policies that schools have, particularly as it relates to organizations like these affinity groups. And they're going to take a very aggressive approach to the Trump administration in its efforts to dismantle these groups. Has Columbia signaled in any way that it is going to stand with those colleges that are saying no, that the interpretation of the college admissions anti-affirmative action decision does not extend to these spaces and places in which folks like the right are trying to use the decision? There are some profiles in courage out there. As you guys have already said, Columbia has not spoken at all, but I'm just wondering if you see any signs that they might come down, on the side of pushing back.
As of right now, I'll be honest with you, we don't know. And I wish I had more hopeful news. I mean, I think we're kind of just as much in the dark as the rest of the public, but we are putting a lot of pressure on them at this point because it is a choice. And I think how we can interpret the executive order, SFA, there is still very much room to stand up for what we believe in, stand up for what we believe is important. And I think at this point, we are just waiting to see, whether Columbia is ready to stand in it with us.
So my last thoughts I have about is protest, because we saw tremendous protest efforts around, the Gaza war. We saw Columbia at the epicenter of a lot of those protests. Do you envision seeing that level of activism around efforts to dismantle DEI, or what Trump is calling these DEI clubs, or Black graduations, or these other activities that have taken place on campus? I'm always curious about what it is that motivates students to go out and protest. Is this going to be an issue that will garner those widespread protest movements that we saw last spring?
It's certainly hard to predict the future, to know exactly what components will be in place. There was a very unique climate on campus last spring, and student bodies change, the administration's responses to it change. But I do know that the net of students that this would be affecting if they chose not to stand by students of color is even larger in terms of people's everyday experiences that will be affected, in terms of students that care for other students that will be affected. And I do think that Columbia should think carefully, and all universities should think carefully about how they want to handle this moving forward so that students really do feel heard. And I hope that they can provide the forums necessary to do that, and that they can make their process more transparent so that it doesn't have to escalate in a way that it did last spring.
I hear what you're saying, Avery, but Christine, I'm curious as to why we haven't already seen that level of activism and protest. I mean, we have enough information. Trump has given us enough information. In the 4 weeks he's been in office, we've seen the directives, we've seen the layoffs, we've seen the freezing of funding, but I haven't seen the protests on any college campuses in the way that we saw last spring. I appreciate what you're saying, Avery, in terms of it being a unique set of circumstances, but that was protest around what was happening, not here in the United States, but in one other country. But why don't we see that same level of outrage when this is something that, as you just said, Avery, directly impacts college students right here in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, I think the campus climate has been irrevocably changed by the events of last spring. And I do think that does impact how students consider how they want to go about their activism and organizing. But I put faith in the passion and resilience of the Columbia community. And I know that maybe we're not mass protesting in the way that we did last spring, but there has definitely been a lot of interior movement about demanding action from the administration, about letting the administration know, hey, if you guys aren't going to stand with us, don't expect us to participate in the admissions game. Don't expect us to help you get students onto this campus when you're not really standing by us. So even though maybe the demonstrations don't look the same as they did, that same level of outrage, frustration, and shock exists. And I think, speaking as a law student, there are a lot of students who are, kind of triaging the bombardment of executive orders that we've been dealing with. And I think that's one way that students are really showing that they're not standing up for this.
So just in closing, Avery, what would you say? What message, if you had an opportunity to speak to the folks at the Department of Education, those folks who are responsible for the recent directive, what message would you like to send to them?
I would say that, this sort of rejection of students of color that have done so much to enrich our academic environments isn't going unnoticed, one. And two, I think that punishing the way that we try to organize and stick together will only change the way that we congregate and come together. It's not going to eliminate it. I think that we're just going to see solidarity in different ways. And so I think if their mission is to suppress students in higher education from being able to find community with each other, they're not going to succeed. And I think the most important thing that we can do right now is deciding where exactly these administrations are going to come down on that front, and how schools are going to support their students of color in this, because it's going to happen regardless.
Well, I'm really encouraged to hear, Christina, what you said, which is that there is a level of outrage and resistance that is happening, even though it may not be manifested in the kinds of protests that we saw on campuses last spring. I am so happy to see that both of you are using your voices, using your positions with BALSA to lead the efforts to push back on this administration, because clearly this isn't just about clubs and organizations. This is about the future of racial discourse, identity, and belonging in, America, and belonging on these college campuses, these predominantly white college campuses. And we have to stand up. We have to fight efforts to erase the progress that we've made in this country around civil rights, around equity, around inclusion. And if we don't stand up in this moment, if we don't fight back in this moment, we could clearly see ourselves, regressing to where we were in this country in the 40s and in the 50s. So thank you so much, Christina. Thank you so much, Avery, for this powerful discussion. This is a conversation that is going to continue. We will not be silenced. These students won't be silenced. I definitely won't be. And until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay on the battlefield fighting for justice. I want to add to this conversation, university professor joining me now is a good friend, Dr. David Eichhardt. He is a professor of African American and Diaspora Studies at Vanderbilt University. Good to see you, my friend. So, Dr. Eichhardt, I just want to know your initial reaction when you learned about the Department of Education's directive to colleges and universities, to K through 12 institutions, basically saying dismantle any and everything that remotely looks like, smells like, or could be DEI, or else risk losing your federal funding.
I think I, share in the same type of kind of shock and dismay as the rest of, particularly Black society, but any critically conscious human being when I saw that. A good friend of mine, Brittany Cooper, kind of summed it up on her Instagram account as the new form of resegregation. This is not simply anymore kind of a tactic to make affirmative action type of moves to increase diversity and equity, short-lived, to shut down. This is literally about institutionalizing white supremacy, because this means not just Black studies, but Asian studies, Jewish studies, women's studies, LGBTQ plus studies. I mean, it absolutely is a very clear, unequivocal attempt to strong-arm the universities into only engaging intellectually with a very biased celebratory perspective with straight white men. I think, even though I imagine that these people had the gumption in terms of their own personal politics to play around with that idea, in their kind of small groups, as we talked about previously in that Project 2025, I didn't think they would be as bold as to try and shove this down the throats of universities. That was a bit shocking, but as we've seen with this administration, anything that was kind of set as precedents before is now completely obliterated. We're living in a whole new, suddenly I guess we celebrate with Russia now, and Ukraine evidently invaded Russia, and what's up is down. But this is definitely Jim Crow 2.0.
So what we know, Professor Eichhardt, about Donald Trump, he likes to float these very extreme positions, like you just said, like Ukraine invaded Russia, and that the Ukrainian president is a dictator. We know the opposite to be the truth.
Right.
And so there are many who believe that this eliminate everything on your campuses, from Black graduations to Black affinity groups and Asian affinity groups and all of those. It's really not about universities doing it, but it is the carrot and stick approach that he uses to extract something.
Right.
Extort, I'll even use that word, something from universities, which, given that we've seen this over and over again, how come more universities aren't standing up to him in the way we've seen? A couple profiles encouraged, but it seems to me that more universities would be pushing back, because there's no legal basis for his position. He's trying to argue that decision by the Supreme Court that limited affirmative action in admissions is the basis, but the legal experts have been clear that there's nothing in that decision that supports this extreme position
at all.
So universities have good lawyers, they have law professors, they have legal teams. So why the capitulation?
Well, that's a great question. I know what's kind of been bandied about as a sit on the fence position by a lot of these universities is what they called principled neutrality. Right, principled neutrality, which basically is a contradiction in terms, because it suggests that you can be principled, but at the same time stay neutral, right? Which, from you imagine that a bunch of marketers, maybe some lawyers, kind of got in a room with some wordsmiths and figured out how do we commit to, like, saying, hey, we stand on things in a principled way, but then be able to take no position. And I imagine that principled neutrality was born out of that boardroom discussion. It's a very sexy way to sit on your hands.
Right.
Because as we know, to be principled is to have a line that if anybody crosses, you are going to take a stand. Martin Luther King was principled when he still spoke out against the Vietnam War, even though Johnson had signed that civil rights bill. And even though a lot of his own Black constituencies were telling MLK, like, throw him a bone, throw the president a bone, he's did this thing. And MLK was like, no, this is my principle. I am anti-war, even though it's going to be unpopular, even when we get a win. Why? Because this is not just about politics. I am principled in this way. This is a fundamental principle of mine. I am anti-war. And it was very unpopular when he did that. So you can't be principled and neutral. And I think I think about that old saying that we attribute to Michael Jordan, which I don't know if it's ever been actually verified, right? But Republicans buy shoes too. So Republicans pay big endowments. Republicans bring their the money, their power, their prestige to these universities too, and these universities in a lot of ways don't want to be on the wrong side of that paycheck. And I think what has happened, because I think the universities thought that they could take this neutral position, and because they were on the sidelines, they could appease both groups. But what they're seeing now in dramatic fashion, which is really causing some major headaches, and it may in fact radically change who can even be accepted into schools next year, because if this holds, and if they can't get that money released in time, even if it gets released, if it's not released in a particular time frame, that means universities that typically maybe offer discounts for students if they make below a certain type of wage. Your parents make a certain amount of money, you get free tuition, like a place like Vanderbilt. I think if you make under a household income under $80,000 and you get accepted, you basically can go to Vanderbilt for free. Those kind of programs we might see them go away because the universities have to. I mean, because we're talking about. I don't think a lot of folks kind of understand this. The federal government, when it comes to research grants at these universities, accounts for 82% of the research grant monies at universities. 82%.
So essentially, if the federal government pulled that money, 82%, would it mean the collapse of all research projects on college campuses? Like, it would be magnitude of it.
It would be cataclysmic. It would be absolutely cataclysmic. So you have to understand that a lot of these are multi-million-dollar, multi-year grants that take sometimes the culmination of 5, 6, even 10 years to even get the grants, because these grants are highly competitive. A lot of times people will apply for them year after year until the grant gets just right and goes through all these different levels of referees until you actually can get the grant funded. And usually it's for major projects in terms of like the human science, the STEM fields, and some of these grants, part of what they're writing a grant is say if you're writing a grant for cancer research, and part of what your project is to monitor a certain kind of enzyme in people over the course of 10 years. Right. So you're writing up a grant basically that'll allow you to do this research for a decade or do this research for 5 years, right? Now, what happens with the way that the grant works, let's say you get awarded $15 million to do this work, right? Now, the universities typically take 50% of that off the top, because the university have to provide the facilities. You have to pay the graduate students and the other type of workers off of that, and all the things that go into housing and providing, the resources for the professors to actually do their work, right? And that helps mitigate a lot of the expenses that the university have to invest in these professors and in these facilities in order for them to accomplish this work. Now, you set about your budget in terms of hiring people, in terms of if you got, I know I've got some neuroscientist friends who have live animals that they have to take care of and make sure that they get a certain kind of medication and certain kind of care. Well, if you've got a grant that lasts for 5, 6, 7 years, and the money's already been allocated to you, there's a whole ecosystem that is
they're still relying on that money.
Absolutely.
Well, let me ask you this, Professor. I hear what you're saying. I hear that this would be cataclysmic, as you use that term. But the woman who Trump has identified to be the head of the Department of Education, when she was being questioned by senators for her appointment, they asked her, would this mean the elimination of classes like the ones that you teach, African American studies, Latin American studies, etc.? She said she didn't know. So this could mean not just clubs, activities, admissions, hiring. It could mean the elimination of classes like your class, your department. So if the universities don't stand up now, you could have the federal government saying you can't even have a Black Studies department. You can't teach a Black Studies class. And what would that do to universities?
Well, let's be clear. Some version of that has already happened in North Carolina. Just recently, as a matter of fact, in the last 10 days, I think, and I didn't know about this. I have a dear friend that's a professor at one of the UNC systems, and they put forth a law that was effective immediately, which basically shut down every deemed DEI class, right? So a lot of universities have a diversity requirement or some kind of inclusive requirement what they, so the students will take these classes to kind of learn about other cultures and so on and so forth. Well, this was people, graduating from college, people finishing up their majors. And when this legislation came down, people who were in the middle of that class, it shut down. They said, you have to shut the class down right now. Like you can't, this is not for next year. This is not effective after this semester. You have to literally shut the class down right now. Which, threw some of these universities into a scramble because some students, if you had 12 hours and you were a full-time student, you were getting federal aid for being a full-time student, and you were taking this class, it was a 3-hour class, you suddenly dropped down to 9 hours, right? If you were going to graduate and you needed these hours or whatever the case may be, suddenly you don't have those hours, and the university's got to scramble to figure out what to do. It's heavy-handed. It's chaotic. It's racist, and I don't think we're saying that enough. I think people keep saying problematic. This is racist.
Well, let me just tell you this, Professor Eicher. I'm not familiar either with that North Carolina law, but I have seen legal experts opine on this directive, this 2-week directive to dismantle all your programs or else lose federal funding. And the consensus is that this is unconstitutional, right, that there's no legal basis for it. Right. And you've seen some associations that represent universities say, don't overreact, don't have a knee-jerk reaction, don't start changing your policies, don't dismantle your programs. So apparently there is some effort, some movement in the university world to resist. Right. So why aren't we seeing more schools, and maybe you've answered it by saying this principal neutrality, but it seems that the folks that represent universities, these trade associations, are saying, no, there's no legal basis for this. They can't just pull your money. These are First Amendment right issues. These are constitutional issues. Keep going.
Right.
Are these university leaders just so feckless? I mean, what is that?
Yes. I mean, the short answer is absolutely. They are feckless. And I think the philosophical approach has been do no harm, right? So and universities are kind of notorious for this anyway, right? Where they will kind of sideline an issue. So they'll just kind of put it aside with the thinking that, we'll just wait it out and maybe it will resolve itself. Mm-hmm. And so we try and not to be political because we're a university of ideas and there's going to be tensions and whatever the case may be. And we're trying to create space where people can have their say and not become a referee. Right. The problem, of course, is when people start doing things unethically, when people start doing things that are blatantly racist, blatantly sexist, blatantly xenophobic, and the university has no response, right? Because the university is still playing the neutral game. And I think because a lot of this stuff has been rolling down the hill for a little bit, but because the universities have had the philosophy has been a kind of hands-off approach, they're ill prepared for the culmination of this, which is, now we're going to just kind of take over the university and tell the universities how they're supposed to think about humanity, how they're supposed to think about the academics, how they're supposed to think about tenure, how they're supposed to think about scholarship. And if you look at universities like the University of Utah at Salt Lake, right, a lot of these things are, have been brewing for a minute in conservative states like Utah, like Florida. We know how much Florida has been in the news. So I think we're going to get. I think this is going to be wave after wave after wave after wave. So it'll be really interesting to see how many of these universities cave and start making, because that's the goal, right? To see if you can't put enough pressure, even though it's legally untenable. Right. But if you put enough pressure and make people think that is an inevitability, then people will start acting preemptively. Right. And that's the fear.
Yeah, that's the chilling effect is to cause folks to go out and start dismantling, even though there's no legal basis. Look, have we been here before, Dr. Eichard? We've had periods of struggle in this country. We've had Reconstruction. We've had Jim Crow. Right. We've had slavery, chattel slavery. But have we ever been where we are in this moment where we've had an assault of this level against education?
Well, tell the MAGA people that we've had slavery and Jim Crow and all these things. I don't think they realize. I think they think that was happening to white people. I honestly, for Black people, this is so insulting to somehow imagine that we have been dominating and oppressing white people. And that somehow now this is a kind of a reckoning so that they get their power back from us. Is a completely twisted and vile, politically terrorist type of act towards those who are the most vulnerable. Now to this,
it's interesting, Dr. Eichard, that they add Asians. So when you look at this directive, it says discrimination has been occurring on these college campuses against whites and Asians.
Yes.
Now, is that, in your opinion, to play into the decision by the Supreme Court, because we know it was Asian students that brought that lawsuit, or is it an attempt to expand the definition of who's white in this country so that Asians are now considered white for purposes of this administration?
I think both and, right? I think one of the things that you saw, this directive that came down the Department of Education that was being circulated, in which they had basically an anti-discrimination statement. And in that anti-discrimination statement, again, they were talking about the oppression of white people and Asians and how these other groups like Black people, because they had Black cultural centers, that they were in fact usurping the self-determination of these people. They were attacking. These were kind of anti-white, anti-Asian types of things, which is just bunk, right? And the only way that type of argument holds is if you completely erase the 300 plus years of slavery, the Jim Crow era, the bloody Reconstruction era, right? That led up to Jim Crow. You'd have to literally erase 85% of American history in order for that argument to have any kind of weight or to hold up in any type of way. And I don't think, at least in the modern era, we've seen anything like this. I think this is so blatantly racist that I don't think people, this, what is it, day 32 or 30, this feels like a 7-year presidency, in 30 years. I'm having a hard time sleeping with anxiety because of what this means and how easily a lot of white folks are falling in line with this. And I'm not.
Well, that was my next question. You're on a campus in the South, you have Vanderbilt University, a predominantly white institution. What are your white colleagues in this moment? What are they saying? Do they feel gleeful? Are they finally, the spotlight's back on us? Or are they feeling that this is an attack on their colleagues, on their students, and that they are standing in solidarity to push back?
I think they're mainly standing in solidarity. I think people are understandably shocked. A lot of times, you have to remember, a lot of times when these attacks are leveled against Black people, and brown people. I think I'm going to stop using people of color because it allows certain people, like certain populations, Asian populations who are aligned with a certain kind of white supremacy, off the hook in that way. I think when these kind of attacks have been levied against Black folks and brown folks to a lesser degree at universities, if you were white, let's say if I'm white and I'm in the physics department, I'm white, I'm in chemistry or whatever the case may be, this is not in my field. This doesn't affect me directly in any kind of negative way. So I'm probably not going to say anything about it, right? Because my research dollars are coming. I don't have any type of, presumably dog in the fight here.
Right.
But now, right, now you're talking about 80% of the grant funding. Right,
that's going to spill over to everyone.
Oh, that everybody is talking about this, right? From chemistry to biology to the division.
But wait a minute, I wonder, Dr. Eichart, are they saying so that you don't mess with my money, shut those clubs down? Yeah, if the Black club, if the Latinx club, if the gay club, if they all have to go, they have to go. That might.
No, I don't. First of all, that's just untenable. Like that literally, when you think about what a university is, right? You're literally talking about something akin to Nazi Germany, right? The universities the way the university is set up now, the university is trying to position itself as a global, right? Like as a global incubator of ideas and of scholarship. So Vanderbilt's push for the last, 5 years is to be global, right? To be kind of, we got a significant amount of our students who are international. In fact, we've got I think as much as 30% and maybe more of our graduate programs are international students. We're trying to open up, campuses around the world. Because the way of the world, the way of science, the way of the economy is global, right? So it's almost like to move in a hard direction towards white supremacy is to literally cut off, your hands to spite your face. Like it just right. Absolutely, it is from an economic standpoint, it's an unworkable model, right? It's not just like, oh, this is how people feel. It's almost like how they tried to put those tents in Guantanamo Bay and then we're going to send these people out there. I talked to somebody who was in the military and he said, that ain't going to work. He's like, there's not enough space. It's too hot. You don't have enough personnel. It's not going to work. It's not even like people who are on the ground who don't know what they're talking about. This is the kind of thing that they say. What just came out in the news 48 hours ago? The Guantanamo Bay camp scrapped, right? Because it's unworkable.
Right. So at the education level, at the college, university level, you're saying this directive
right.
that universities have 2 weeks is right. unworkable.
It's unworkable.
Yeah, we are out of time, Professor. Always such a pleasure. Your insights are so incredible, so important in this moment that voices like yours are elevated. Obviously, this isn't just about clubs and organizations. This is about the future of racial discourse, absolutely. Our identity and belonging in this country, and definitely on campuses that look like your campus. Yes. We are and cannot allow erasure of all of our history, our accomplishments, our contributions to this country. We've got to stand up. We've got to fight back. We've got to continue to speak truth to power about how untenable these directives are coming from this White House. Again, I want to thank Christina, Avery, and Dr. Eichart for this powerful, powerful discussion. This is a conversation that we are going to continue to have. We won't be silenced. So until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay on the battlefield fighting for justice. I'm Areva Martin, and this has been the Special Report. If you want more information about the Special Report, follow me across all social platforms at Areva Martin. Subscribe to my YouTube page and share the Special Report.
Calling all BIPOC college students, recent college graduates, and clinicians. Here's my story about CORE, a unique workforce development program that is changing lives. My brother is the most caring person you'll ever meet. With his autism diagnosis, my family had to fight to make sure that the resources he deserved were available. That's why my goal has always been to help children with developmental disabilities and give them chances my brother may have missed. So when I heard about the CORE Fellowship, I knew immediately it was for me. The fellowship opens doors for myself and others like me. They offer training, a stipend while you're learning, job placement, and they'll pay up to $10,000 of my student loan debt. The CORE Fellowship is going to allow me to achieve my life's purpose. They care about me, so I can care about others, like my brother. Visit the website to learn more about the CORE Fellowship. Discover your core passion, your power, and your purpose. Apply today.